Welcome to the Lehigh Gap Nature Center and Wildlife Refuge. This is the only refuge in the country where a Superfund site has been transformed into an environmental education center. A Superfund site is an area where the U.S. government requires responsible parties to restore polluted areas. Here is the story of how a group of dedicated people has changed a toxic waste site into a healthy refuge for wildlife and humans. It is a story involving history, smart science, and the desire to make a difference in the world. The story takes place here in the gap carved into the Blue Mountain by the Lehigh River. The ridge was created when sandstone was formed in an inland sea over 400 million years ago, then uplifted and folded 270 million years ago when the African and North American continental plates collided. The Blue Mountain is the southernmost ridge of the Appalachian Mountains. The Lenape Indians named it Kittatinny, or Endless Mountain. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, travelers raved about the beauty of the Lehigh Gap and considered it one of the most beautiful resort areas in the country. In 1898, Stephen S. Palmer moved the New Jersey Zinc Company from Newark, New Jersey to the Lehigh Gap area and established the town of Palmerton. Besides its scenic beauty and the availability of a good water supply from the Lehigh River, Palmerton was chosen as the site for the zinc company because it was close to the coal mines of the north. In addition, railroads were in place to transport the coal to Palmerton as well as to transport the zinc that was produced to points south, such as Philadelphia, where it was used in die casting, brass making, galvanized steel, white paint, and ointment to prevent sunburn. The New Jersey Zinc Company was manned by immigrants brought to the area from Ellis Island in New York. Palmerton was a company town, but a well-planned community from the start with good housing for employees, schools, a hospital, and a library. The plant operated from 1898 through 1980. The land around Palmerton showed the effects of the smelting process, which involves heating the zinc ore to a high temperature in order to separate out the zinc. Sulfur dioxide from coal burning was released into the air, resulting in acid rain and deposits which killed the vegetation in the surrounding area. In addition, zinc, cadmium, and lead, all heavy metals, were carried out of the smokestacks and deposited on the land and in the water. Zinc prevents proper root growth, so plants couldn't survive. Without plants, animals disappeared. Bacteria and fungi couldn't live in the metal, contaminated soil, so decomposition no longer took place. Tree skeletons were left scattered on the landscape. Without plants to hold down the soil, it eroded away, leaving what looked like a moonscape behind with no value as a wildlife habitat. The degraded areas were designated a Superfund site in 1983. Parties responsible for the problem were required by law to correct the situation. The story of the Lehigh Gap Wildlife Refuge began in 1986 when Donald Heinzelman, a noted author and founder of the Bake Oven Knob Hawk Count, formed the Wildlife Information Center. This center focused on the preservation of wildlife and habitat and conservation education. After Heinzelman's retirement in 1998, Dan Kunkel, a local high school biology teacher, became the director of the center. On the suggestion of board member Grant White, the Wildlife Information Center purchased 3 tracts of land in the Lehigh Gap area in December 2002. The center office was moved into the private residence on the property, which they named the Osprey House. The Wildlife Center became known as the Lehigh Gap Nature Center. The 3 tracts of land make up the Lehigh Gap Wildlife Refuge. The 750-acre wildlife refuge is ideally situated with the Lehigh River and the historically significant Delaware and Lehigh Trail running along its length in the valley. The Lehigh Canal was built in 1829 to carry coal from the mountains of the north to markets in Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, and to connect with the Delaware Canal, which ended in Philadelphia, and the Morris Canal to New York City. The famous Appalachian Trail is easily accessed on the mountain behind the Osprey House. Lenape Indians used to burn the area on top of the ridge just west of the gap in order to enhance berry production. These Indians used the Nescopec Trail, which is now Route 248, to move through the gap. The same trail was used by the Moravians to travel from Bethlehem to Gnadenhutten near Lehighton. Benjamin Franklin traveled through the area and built forts such as Fort Allen during the French and Indian War. John James Audubon spent time in the Lehigh Gap area to paint some of his bird pictures. In addition to historical significance, the refuge also has a variety of wildlife habitats: wooded slopes, bottomland wetlands, and ponds. The Lehigh River, seeps and springs, pitch pine hairgrass savanna at higher elevations, cliffs and talus slopes where peregrine falcons nested in the early 1900s, and scrub. Even our Osprey House chimney provided a habitat for a merganser duck family. Lehigh Gap Nature Center is also only 8 miles from Bake Oven Knob, where the hot count has been done since 1961. Each fall, Lehigh Gap Nature Center provides volunteers and a college intern to continue the count. Rare plant species live here. Wild bleeding heart and sandwort thrive on the refuge. About 1/2 of the 750 acres making up the refuge is part of the Palmerton Superfund site. Where others saw a degraded mountain, the Lehigh Gap Nature Center saw an opportunity. Bill Mineo, former D&L trail manager and now a board member at Lehigh Gap Nature Center, suggested a way to restore the mountain. Naturally occurring prairie grasses could be planted. Prairie grasses, most of which are warm season grasses, thrive in hot weather since they have very long roots and do not take up the heavy metals, therefore keeping them out of the food chain. The Environmental Protection Agency approved the plan, and in May of 2003, Lehigh Gap Nature Center and CBS, the company responsible for the Superfund cleanup, planted 56 one-acre test plots. Each test plot was seeded with a variety of native grasses such as big blue stem, Canada wild rye, Indian grass, switchgrass, and little blue stem. Lime, fertilizer, and compost were added to the mix by tractors and spreaders. Even people were used to seed the mountainside by hand. The seeds germinated, and the Blue Mountain turned green. Seeding continued over the next several years. Crop dusters seeded the steep slopes from the air. And a thriving grassland was the amazing result. Animals moved back into the restored habitat. Crickets could be heard singing again. Grasshoppers and rodents returned. Red fox and deer have been spotted. Black rat snakes have been seen sunning themselves on the rocks. Tree swallows, eastern bluebirds, and the American kestrels nest in the boxes placed for them. Soil bacteria increased 1,000 times, and each winter, as the grasses die back, compost is added to the newly forming soil. Erosion has been halted, and the metals have been held in place instead of being passed up the food chain. Wildflowers and other native plants are being added to the restored areas in order to enhance the grassland habitat. In 2010, the Osprey House was expanded to include classrooms, a lab, housing for caretakers and interns, and meeting rooms. Green construction was used, including super insulation, geothermal heating and cooling, use of recycled materials, and efficient lighting. The new center facilitates the accomplishment of the mission of the Lehigh Gap Nature Center to preserve wildlife and habitat through conservation, education, and research for the benefit of the earth and all its inhabitants. Lehigh Gap Nature Center receives no ongoing government funding Only grants, donations, and membership fees support its efforts, and it is run by volunteers. Some of the things done in carrying out its mission include research, education for all ages, public programs and events, building and maintaining trails for recreation. The center presently has 14 miles of trails. Native plant gardens on the property demonstrate how beautiful the plants which were originally found in Pennsylvania can be. Native plants require little care since they are adapted to our area and provide native wildlife with the food they need. This is a story of how a dream of restoration became a reality. It is the story of how a moonscape was turned into an outdoor recreation and environmental education center. It is a story of hope and how dedicated people can make good things happen. It is the story of the Lehigh Gap Nature Center.